There's one button inside Ableton Live that can basically create sounds on the fly for you. It's called Random. You can find it in any rack, and here are some examples of what it can do. In this video I want to show you how you can turn this one knob into some personal creative assistant inside the DAW that can help you come up with more inspiring and creative sounds. First of all, hi and welcome to this video. My name is Yannis, and most sounds in Ableton Live are organized in racks, which you can also see when you're going to the instrument rack preset folder. So here, for example, if you would load some bass sound, you see we have some rack, and rack means we have macros that we can then randomize with this button I've shown you in this short intro. And if it happens that there's no instrument rack for a sound you like, you can easily build it yourself by just loading some instrument rack and then, for example, dragging some instance of a synth into the rack. And then you can easily just right-click on whatever parameter you want to change, map it to some macro, and here you go. It's really easy. But I also made some more detailed video about instrument racks that you can find here. If you haven't been using racks so far, I can highly encourage you to try it out, because it's some super great way of simplifying your sounds and also makes it easier for communicating with some MIDI controller, and this way also getting off screen. Now, if you're using it for the first time, it's the best to just press the random knob a couple of times and see what happens without thinking about it much, because you saw that it can produce some super cool sounds. Nevertheless, there's always the chance that it becomes too random, so that there's maybe a knob that just destroys the sound or just makes settings too extreme. And now we can make some refinements to it. Next to the random button you see map, and if you click it, then this menu has to be opened. You can set a range for all those knobs, which is super amazing. So now don't be confused. It's all double because the instance here has two analog synths, because it's some Moog type sound, and the classic mini Moog had like 3 oscillators, so I was using a second analog instance to kind of get that sound, which is a great example of how useful those instrument racks can be. And one thing that annoys me is the detune. The range is a little too high for me, so actually I reduced it already, as you can see, but it still goes all the way to 32, and I want it to be a little lower, so I can just reduce it here. And this way shape the kind of range in which those randomizations can act, and I find this incredibly useful. And you could do the same for the cutoff, because I just want to get some results up to 1.1K, let's say, together with the resonance, because the resonance and the cutoff always create some super interesting sweet spots, and you can make it more realistic to get cool results by reducing the range, because if the cutoff is at like 8,000 Hertz, it doesn't really impact the resonance. But if you make sure to not go over 1,000 or 1,100, you'll always be in this kind of sweet spot area. Added to that, it's also super important to know that you can exclude macros from the randomization. So if you right-click, for example, on the legato, because it's just some on-off switch, you can select exclude macro from randomization, and it will never be affected. So it always stays on the setting that you set here. And you can also do the same for variations, because variations are those things on the left side. And I'll talk about them in a second. If you want to say, I only want to explore the relationship between cutoff and resonance and detune, but have a kind of cool setting for the envelope, you can also just click exclude macro from randomization for all those envelope settings and purely focus on the sound. So now I'm going to select some very long attacks, so we get this kind of swell. Now I'm going to exclude it from the randomizations, like the envelope, so we only get changes in the cutoff, resonance, and detune. And all of a sudden we have a way more refined sonic picture that we create with any new preset. Once there's a setting you really like, you can save it by just creating some new macro preset. You have to click New, and then this camera icon, then you can also give it a name, Command R. I'm not going to give it a name now. And this is also how those presets or little macro presets have been created. I also really like using the random button for understanding and learning how a synthesizer works by focusing really particular on one section of the sound. Because when you're deciding what kind of macros you use, you tend to be flexible. So you want to use something of everything, a little bit of the envelope, a little bit of the oscillators, but you can also decide that all you're going to do is selecting parameters that are responsible for one particular part of the sound. And this way, just use it for creating as many options as you can. Here I have some version of Drift loaded into some instrument rack, and I really like Drift because it's so simple, yet you can explore a lot of different textures sonically. And let's just focus on the sound. So we can map, for example, the waveform of both oscillators to some macros. Also, the shape has a big impact on the sound, so we're also going to use this. Maybe also the oscillator volume, because different volumes have some different impact on the filter, and we can fine-tune. So for example, the gain has to be always at least, let's say, -10. But it can go all the way to the top. For the shape, it's fine that we use the whole range, and yeah, for the waves we can't select some range here, but that's fine. I also quickly adjusted the filter and the envelope so the sound is a little more interesting and not as dull as in this first setting, but nothing is mapped here. So we can purely focus on the oscillators now, and let's just see what happens. You can also use the random buttons for creating new presets with third-party plugins, so you're not restricted to only using Ableton effects, because you can still load, for example, Arturia Pigments, one of my favorite synth plugins, into a normal instrument rack. You have to go through mapping those parameters. It doesn't look so great, but you'll get through it. And then you can just use it in exactly the same way that I've shown to you before. And I think that's also amazing because you can integrate other plugins into your Ableton Live workflow if you get used to using macros and maybe you have some MIDI mappings with a controller. And one last thing that I find super amazing is that when you're using some instrument rack, you can still use MIDI effects and audio effects. So here you can see some instrument rack of my mobile Vermona Performer sampler, because it's something I'm working on currently for having some mobile device with the sound of my sampled Vermona Performer that I love so much but can't carry with me all the time. So I can play it with my Nord drum as a MIDI instrument. And here you can see that I have some parameters of the sampler, like the cutoff, while at the same time having some MIDI effects like chord, where I can just add some polyphony. And the stereo width, for example, is linked to some utility instance at the end of the chain where I have the width, and this is some audio effect. So this rack kind of includes everything, and it's just giving you so many possibilities for creating your own unique performance setups. And speaking about this rack, it includes some super special sequencing trick that is inspired by the Performer, and for a long time I didn't think it would be possible to imitate this inside Ableton Live, but it kind of works this way, and I explain it in some video that you're warmly invited to watch here. Apart from that, I wish you lots of inspiration with exploring the random button and really hope to see you soon again at this channel. Bye!